Today we're watching 5 shorts attempting to solve theology's biggest PR disaster, the problem of evil. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why do children get cancer, and also why wasps exist? Let's take a look.
Does God allow cruelty and suffering in the world?
This is one of the biggest questions. I'm not going to pretend to fully answer it here, but here's a couple things to keep in mind.
Translation: I don't know, but please don't leave yet. Smart move. Because if you did try to fully answer it, you'd have to admit God either isn't omnipotent, isn't omnibenevolent, or has a disturbing habit of watching atrocities unfold like a live broadcast. Every horror, every scream, in real time, no intervention. All loving, try all watching.
Why does God allow cruelty? Because God has made us for relationship.
You tell that to the mother who just saw her child get devoured by a pack of wild dogs. Ma'am, I'm so sorry about your son being eaten alive piece by piece, but hey, relationship goals. He just wanted you two to be closer. The Pink Panther music might help smooth that over, though.
If we're going to be able to choose to love and show mercy and commit acts of courage and justice, we've got to have the capacity to choose not to do those things and be cruel.
So this is the classic free will defense, which goes like this. Real love requires freedom. Freedom requires the possibility of cruelty. Therefore, cruelty is a necessary byproduct of a meaningful relationship. Except free will does not require maximum horror settings. You can have free beings without the option of being eaten alive by zombies. An omnipotent God could presumably create a world where people remain free, but the consequences of cruelty are, say, a mild rash. But he chooses not to. The second problem: this doesn't explain natural evil. Earthquakes, tsunamis. Animal suffering is off the charts. If cruelty is about human choice, why does so much suffering exist completely outside human choice? And the third biggest problem: if free will is so sacred, why is there no sin in heaven? Are we free up there or not? Or does God suddenly figure out how to create free creatures who don't kill people? Because if that's possible later, it was possible earlier. Which means the whole free will requires suffering argument is just a lie.
But second, the greatest good in life is to know God personally.
Not if that God can sentence you to infinite suffering. Without God, death is final. It's the end of the story. With this God, death is not an escape. It could be the beginning of an eternal performance review that goes very, very badly. Even Sean here, if he had the option to opt out of judgment now, I'll bet you, if he truly understood what eternal torture means, if he could really grasp infinite, conscious suffering without end, he would slam that button like it owed him money. Even if you get in heaven, what if something changes? If you think about it, that's terrifying. Simply put, a universe where suffering is finite is morally superior to one where suffering can be infinite. The greatest conceivable good wouldn't be knowing a being who can torture forever. It would be existing in a finite, proportionate universe where consequences end.
God has made us for a relationship. And sometimes when we see cruelty in the world, it reminds us of our own brokenness, our own frailty, our own desperate need for forgiveness from God. And God can even use acts of cruelty to draw us to Him.
Using evil for good is not the same as justifying the evil. Otherwise, this logic works for anyone who thinks burning down a building teaches responsibility. If you're omnipotent, you don't need to run a pain-based lesson plan. You can just achieve the outcome directly. Free will and relationship might explain some moral evil in theory, but they do not explain the scale, randomness, and absolute overkill of suffering we actually observe.
Doesn't solve it, but 2 things to get the ball rolling.
Correct. It doesn't solve it. The ball is not rolling. The ball is on fire. The ball is covered in third-degree burns that God could have prevented but chose not to, for relationship reasons. Anyway, next.
We'll never be able to adequately answer the problem of evil unless you stop doing this one thing. Listen, I totally understand that free will is an enticing way to answer the problem of evil. However, it suffers from this one objection, and that's called the overvalued freedom objection. In short, this maintains that the value of freedom and free will is not enough to outweigh or justify the horrendous sufferings committed by humans and as well as natural disasters. Instead of having to rely on free will outweighing the badness of suffering, opt in for something we call the defeat provision. The defeat provision simply states that God is morally justified in allowing suffering if that evil is intrinsically has the potential to be defeated.
Okay, first of all, respect. You admitted free will can't carry the weight of genocide, childhood cancer, and tsunamis. That's growth. Now we have something called the defeat provision, which, translated into normal human language, means it's okay that the horror happened because later it'll fit into a bigger, prettier story. But here's the question. Is the potential for defeat enough to justify permitting the horror in the first place? Because in literally every other moral context, the answer is no. So why does it become profound when God does it? You're still using suffering as a means to an end. The only difference is now it's defeated suffering. But defeated after how long? After how much terror? After how much screaming? If the horror was not logically necessary, and God could have made the same defeat happen without it, why permit it at all? This guy spent 6 minutes debating Alex O'Connor on the same topic. 6 minutes of pure, unadulterated nonsense.
Have you heard of the axiological expectation mismatch problem? I don't think that God actually creates worlds. I think that God lets worlds develop. That's particularly assuming a value theory already that I haven't told you I'm adopting that has a problem with the evil. So I have to give you my value theory first for you to show that misalignment. There's a couple of theses on the table.
Okay.
I'm gonna put one thesis on the table. There's two philosophers that defend exactly what this goes through. One defends that animals will be given a martyrdom status.
And then Alex actually pressed him on the issue.
If I were to punch you in the face and then give you $20,000 afterwards, you might be grateful for the $20,000,
Yeah.
but why couldn't I just give you the $20,000?
Well, see, so that's assuming, so I saw your debate with Trent Horn.
You've been voted out
All right.
by the majority.
Awesome,
Please
man.
return to your
Bringing up Alex's debate with Trent Horn means we're about to waste more time. Honestly, it's a relief he got voted out. At some point you have to answer, my friend.
There's two ways to solve the problem of evil according to the Bible. Let's look at it. The first way is found in Genesis 6, where God saw that the evil of man was great on the earth, and people's thoughts were only evil continually, so God was grieved in his heart. So we know the story. God killed all the evil people. That's one way to solve the problem.
Small correction. He didn't just kill the evil people. He killed everyone and anything that breathed. Children, infants, puppies, innocent birds, random livestock. Basically, if it moved, it got a one-way ticket to Davy Jones's locker.
Every living thing that moved on land perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark.
So God's wise solution to violence was mass genocide. Wow. Hate to break it to you, but killing everyone, including children and animals, because humans are evil, doesn't look like a morally superior solution. It looks like collective punishment on an enormous scale. Nice first impression, God.
But 3 chapters later, God promised to humanity that he would never again flood the earth to destroy it. So obviously God is never going to destroy the earth ever again.
Oh, well, that's comforting. Except it's absolutely not. Just read your book. The large-scale slaughter of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Canaanites. The Amalekites. That poor guy gathering sticks on the Sabbath. The word again is doing way too much heavy lifting here.
But there's a second solution, which is much better for us humans. Let's check it out. God says in Ezekiel 36, I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you will be careful to do my judgments. Fun fact, guys, God has the ability to put his Holy Spirit within people and make them obey him so that they stop acting wickedly. That's the better solution. Instead of killing all the evil people, how about you make all the people perfect?
If God had the technology to make people stop being evil, then why not do it for everyone from the beginning and skip the genocide phase entirely? Or, skip straight to world peace? And if he can do it anytime, why is he choosing not to do it now? This isn't a solution to the problem of evil. This is evidence that the problem was designed. So, recap. 2 solutions. Wiping out humanity like a maniac in a horror show. Override human behavior from the inside. Which, by the way, completely detonates the free will defense. And apparently, God is not really committed to either one.
That's what God does through faith in Jesus Christ. That's what we receive when we put our faith in him. We receive the Holy Spirit.
Okay, genuine question. Have you met Christians? I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean historically. 2,000 years of church history, and we still have wars fought in the name of Christ, abuse scandals, corruption, division, political power plays. If this is the promised change, history didn't notice.
Why does God allow suffering? This is probably the most powerful argument against religion. After all, why would an all-loving God create a world in which a 5-year-old dies of cancer? Theologians have wrestled with this question for thousands of years. St. Augustine wrote that God won't bring about an evil unless he could bring about a greater good as a result. St. Thomas Aquinas believed that suffering purifies us, detaching us from earthly desires. These are all interesting arguments, but try explaining them to a family that just lost their kid. Yeah, good luck.
I appreciate the honesty about Augustine and Aquinas. Really, it's refreshing to hear someone admit that their arguments are great for a philosophy seminar and absolutely useless at a funeral. God allows evil to bring about a greater good? Yeah, tell that to the parents at the funeral. And Aquinas saying suffering purifies us? 5-year-olds don't need spiritual exfoliation. They need cartoons, snacks, and a future.
I think the best answer we can find is in the book of Job. You see, Job's a righteous man. He loves God. So God takes everything away, kills his family, gives him disease, and no surprise, Job starts to hate his life. He's also confused because he hasn't done anything wrong. In the end, he asks God why. Why did you do this to me? Instead of giving him an answer, God simply asks, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?
So, the answer is in the book of Job, the story where God makes a bet with Satan, destroys a good man's life, kills his children, takes away his wealth, and afflicts him with disease, just to win an argument, and then answers,
Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb?
If I were Job, I'd be like, what does geology have to do with my dead kids, sir? What God conveniently didn't tell Job is that this is all just a wager, and we're supposed to read this and think, what a loving God. If the answer to suffering is, you're not in a position to understand, then every confident Christian explanation collapses immediately. And if God's reasons are beyond human comprehension, then we cannot evaluate his actions. And if we cannot evaluate his actions, on what basis do we call him good? Calling someone good implies we understand, at least partially, what goodness means. If good just means whatever God does, then the word has been emptied. Mystery can explain why we don't know the reason. It doesn't explain why there is a good reason. And yes, Job gets his wealth back later, doubled livestock, and he gets new children too, 7 sons and 3 daughters, the exact same numbers as before. We're even given the daughters' names, plus a note that they were the most beautiful women in the land and received an inheritance. Lovely touch. Meanwhile, the original 10 children who were crushed to death, just quietly written out of the script like disposable NPCs. This story teaches me that the God of the Bible really is just Satan, or at least they share the same management style.
The truth is, suffering is a mystery.
Mystery is intellectually honest, but mystery is not resolution. It's not an answer. It's a timeout. It may comfort emotionally, but philosophically, it shifts the move from explanation to surrender.
Whatever happens, in the end, we all have the hope of eternal joy in heaven.
We already covered this with the defeat provision guy, but let's repeat. Future reward does not automatically justify present suffering, because an all-powerful, all-loving being can grant eternal joy without routing billions of lives through extreme trauma first. So the logical structure becomes, yes, the suffering is horrific. Yes, we don't understand it. Yes, it looks unjust. But trust that later it'll be worth it. That logic works in one place, when the person allowing the suffering didn't design the system. So, the problem of evil isn't solved here, it's postponed to the afterlife. And if you want to see someone speak fluent theological gibberish without answering anything, Watch this.
Part of the question of the problem of evil, which I think is arguably the hardest apologetic question there is, because there isn't a simple answer to it, is the fact that the question assumes something to begin with, is that evil is something, right? We see it in the world. We see the brokenness. We understand that this beautiful world wasn't meant to be like this to some degree. And so the fact that evil is something testifies to there being an objective standard to weigh that by, right? If there is an objective evil, you're positing an objective good. And if you're positing an objective good, you're positing a moral law. Well, we need an answer for who that moral lawgiver is. And apart from God, I really think you're running into a lot of issues.
We were talking about why children get cancer, and now we're in a philosophy seminar about moral ontology. Very slick, Wes. If God is the ultimate moral lawgiver, then in what sense can we meaningfully say God's actions are evil? If whatever God does is automatically good by definition, drowning the planet, commanding genocide, killing Job's kids for a bet, then moral language becomes circular. God is good just means God does what God does. But if we can evaluate God's actions against a moral standard, say, calling certain acts cruel, unjust, or disproportionate, then that standard appears logically independent of God. In that case, God isn't the source of morality. He's subject to it. And if he's subject to it, then we have to ask, is he meeting the standard? What we really have, by the way, is evolved social instincts, empathy, and shared human vulnerability. Shout out to Wes Huff for admitting this is the hardest apologetic question. I agree, it's hard, mostly because reality keeps interrupting the theology. But it's unfortunate that he had to shift the topic to moral realism, insisting that objective moral facts exist. The problem of evil doesn't require atheism to prove objective morality, Wes. This is an internal critique. In your worldview, an all-good, all-powerful God and evil both exist. Cool, now reconcile them.
Removing God from the picture, I don't think solves the problem. I actually think it complicates it because it means that evil is purposeless. And if evil is purposeless, then it really doesn't matter why you're struggling with any one particular issue. That's just we're bags of meat running into other bags of meat. And so we're all going to die either sometime soon or at the heat death of the universe. And so who cares?
Still running away from the problem. So the defense is, with God, your suffering has meaning. Without God, it's meaningless. But in the story of Job, the suffering is meaningless with God. His children die for a wager. A universe without God might be cold and indifferent, and that's tragic. But at least it's not designed this way, which is disturbing.
And I think that's a problem. And I think we realize that's a problem. And one of the most quoted verses in the Bible, from the Bible, is a version of Exodus 34:6, where God describes his character as compassionate and merciful and overabounding in steadfast love. And I've always thought it was interesting as someone who has been very interested in linguistics and philology, and that the English word compassion, which seems to be the stream throughout the different iterations of that Exodus 34:6, whether you're finding in the prophets or the Psalms, is that compassion in English comes from two Latin words, com meaning with and passion meaning suffering. And that the God of the Bible is not someone who is aloof. It's not the God of theism or deism. It's not the God that sets things in motion, but it's a God who actually can relate to our hurt.
Thank you for the Latin lesson. But the etymology of the English word compassion doesn't determine what the original Hebrew authors meant, nor does it demonstrate that God literally suffers with humanity. More importantly, being emotionally present is not the same as preventing the suffering. If I'm watching you drown and I say, I feel your pain, but I also have a rope and choose not to throw it, my compassion is just commentary. It's not help.
Because unlike, I think, any other God in any other religious perspective, the God that we serve stepped out of eternity and into humanity in the second person of the Trinity and experiences that and can relate to that, can relate to abandonment and torture and hurt and heartbreak.
Tell that to Job, who begged God to end his misery and was denied. Also, historically speaking, the idea of a God entering human experience isn't unprecedented. There are incarnational themes in multiple ancient traditions. Yes, Christianity has a unique framing, but the broader category isn't exclusive. More importantly, does incarnation solve the problem? If a firefighter sets the building on fire, then runs in and gets burned rescuing people, we don't call that heroic. The question isn't, can God relate to suffering? The question is, why does an omnipotent being permit it at all? Stepping into the burning building you designed doesn't resolve the design choice.
And so I think the problem of evil is the hardest question, but the fact that evil is something, and also that evil is not something, right? That we can't measure it. We can't put it in a jar and say, this is depravity, and if I pour it on you, you're going to be worse than you were before. And so that means something too, doesn't it? In that we understand that evil is something, but that it doesn't carry an ontological status, and that God has and is doing something about evil.
Is he, though? Is God doing something about evil? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like he's just watching. And even if evil isn't a physical substance you can put in a jar, suffering absolutely has ontological weight. Pain, disease, war, and grief are not imaginary. Many real things aren't physical objects, economies, gravity, information, yet they profoundly affect reality. Calling evil a privation doesn't make burned children less burned. Again, within the theistic framework, evil exists. God is all good. God is all powerful. How do those coexist without contradiction? We're still waiting.
When Christ died on the cross, that started the work of making all things new. And so God is not indifferent about suffering because it killed his son. And so I think we can speak to people who are hurting and who are suffering and say, God cares about you, and God probably understands that more than you know.
God sacrificing himself to save us from himself because of a rule he made is not an answer to the problem of evil. And if the solution to suffering was launched at the cross, well, it's been 2,000 years. Hospitals are still full, children still die, natural disasters still flatten cities. So what have we learned from 5 shorts? The free will defense fails because natural evil exists. The soul-making defense fails because some suffering clearly doesn't make anyone better. The greater good defense fails because no good justifies certain evils. The defeat provision fails because an omnipotent God could achieve the same ends without the means. The God suffers with us defense fails because sympathy isn't a solution. And the mystery defense is just giving up with extra steps. The problem of evil isn't hard because humans are too dumb to understand it. It's hard because the traditional picture of an all-powerful, all-knowing, perfectly loving being clashes violently with reality. See you next time.
Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Juliet, Juliet, wherefore art thou, Juliet?
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, which one of thou art Romeo?
Juliet, Juliet, I am not overly sure.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, then let us call thy numbers.
Juliet, Juliet, then I shall take thy life.
Die, Romeo, thou stupid asshole.
I shall make thee regret the day of thy birth.
I shall make thee taste dirt.
Destroy.
I'll kill thee.
Die, die, die.
I'll tear the shit out of thee.
Be gone from this world forever, wench.
Meet the double wretched man.
Piss it off.
My Romeos are no more. I have slain them each and all. I must join them anon.
Well, I suppose this marks the end of our production of Romeos and Juliets. Please watch your step as you exit. If you'd like to have your card stamped